Right, so as you can tell from the title and the thumbnail, I'm going to be talking about Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. I will be calling it Cursed Child throughout because I just think it sounds better and I've read too much Shakespeare. I'm going to be splitting my review into 3 parts: plot, characters and writing, because they are the most important things to me when it comes to reading something, so let's crack on. Now for me, the plot falls a little flat at areas. It doesn't seem feasible in the actual world of Harry Potter, in the little bubble of rules that has been created. This plot doesn't seem to fit within those rules. There's new magic in it and there's hideous abuse of time turners. There's not really much substance to what's going on or much explanation. It's just sort of like, this is what's happening and let's roll with it. And it's not really anything substantial. Like, it feels like even from the Philosopher's Stone you could tell that the whole thing was meticulously planned out by JK, and it felt like nothing was really missed out. Like, even from the very first book, it's all wrapped up at the end and everything's planned out, everything, like the whole universe is contained, where this doesn't really fit into those rules that she's created. The new magic that's used would have made things so much easier in the plots of the other books. Like, it would have wrapped up everything a lot quicker if they knew about this magic, which sort of makes me feel that it's unnecessary to include it in this one, or whether it was necessary at all to have these new spells or anything. Like, surely everything sort of needs to be contained. Like, yes, they can discover new things all the time, like we do with science and things like that, but it just sort of feels like these new spells were created just to make things easier and move things along quicker than if they were bound by the same restrictions that Harry, Ron and Hermione had when they were growing up and finding the flaws in other people's magic, rather than just going, I'll just use a time turner to fix that and then we can pretend it never happened, which is what happens in here a lot. There are little inconsistencies that don't seem to fit with the flow of the previous books. Like, things that have come out in this seem to have happened in between books that wouldn't normally have fit, or would have definitely changed the plot or the outcomes or certain little things about characters whilst those events were happening. Like, they didn't seem to fit in the timeline kind of thing. They were just sort of a bit, we'll stick something here because no one really knows what happens, when this event that's stuck here in between this and this event would have definitely had an effect on this event. Like, it can't just be ignored and swapped out. Like, it just doesn't really make sense to me, and just little things like that bug me. And the way things are wrapped up and resolved at the end and how the conflict is resolved feels like a bit of a cop-out to me. It feels it's on a par with the It Was All a Dream kind of cop-out for me. It just didn't really feel like it flowed nicely and was a sort of nice little wrap-up. It was a sort of like, everything's all happening at once and I don't really know what to do with it. I can't digest that amount of stuff all at once. Some of the characters did redeem the messy plot. Like, Scorpius was adorable. Everyone seems to love Scorpius. That seems to be the general consensus on Scorpius. He doesn't really feel like a Malfoy to me. Like, yes, he's in Slytherin, but he doesn't feel like a Malfoy. He doesn't have evil ambition and he doesn't have that kind of snidiness about him. His ambition is more intellectual and academic. So he's essentially more of, he's Hermione but sorted into Slytherin, which is really, really nice. Kind of like a nice little change. And I do like how the 2 main characters within the book, Albus and Scorpius, have both been sorted into Slytherin. So it's nice to see a different kind of perspective on Slytherin, where the 2 heroes of the book are in Slytherin. So it just sort of gives Slytherin a little bit more of a good rep and not the kind of evil wizards. However, the adults in the book let me down tremendously. Like, Ron has just been reduced to the little comic relief that happens. He feels very much like the porter in Macbeth, that little one who just wanders on, says some funny lines just to break up the tension kind of thing. And it doesn't really feel like there's anything left of Ron anymore. It feels like it's all been taken away and he's just this bit part, rather than there's so much more to Ron than just comedy. Like, yes, Ron's a funny character, but there's also lots of other elements to him that make him Ron Weasley, and they've taken all those away and just left the comedy, and it doesn't really work as well as it could have done. Hermione changes slightly, but not too much. She's still very clever and she's still very caring, and her and Ron are very much in love. However, there's certain things she does. She makes mistakes, like big ones, and Hermione doesn't make those kind of mistakes. She plans things out so meticulously that she could have thought of everything that could possibly go wrong. She's very careful in her planning, so her actions towards the beginning of it don't really make sense to me, because that's not what she does. Harry let me down the most. I was expecting this big kind of thing with like the golden trio all back together kind of thing, but Harry just sort of lets the side down. He's a good dad to two of his children. Like, there's a little outburst in an argument he has with Albus which doesn't make any sense whatsoever, that is so out of character and upsetting, and he's constantly blaming his actions on the fact that he didn't have a father to base himself on. But he didn't need a father to base himself on. He had Hagrid, he had Sirius, he had Remus, and he had Dumbledore, and all those kind of male figures. Even Arthur Weasley, he had father figures everywhere. Like, just because of the fact that his biological father wasn't around anymore isn't an excuse for being a dick. However, Harry's redeeming quality was Ginny. The marriage between those two was played out really well, in my opinion. I like the fact that there's still a kind of, there's support there, there's a lot of love there, there's little flashbacks to when they were children. She remembers things that he's done that make him a good person and tells him about them and makes sure he knows that he's not essentially a bad person, he's just making a few mistakes with the raising of his child. And I do like Ginny in this. I like grown-up Ginny. There's a moment where Albus and Scorpius are missing and they're trying to find out where they've gone, and Draco is with them and he just shouts at Ginny, "My son is missing," and she shouts back even louder, "And so is mine." Like, even in the writing you can feel like the kind of lioness protecting her cubs. You can feel it in that little sentence, and that made me quite happy that Ginny is still quite badass, because in the films she wasn't, but in the books she was, and like, I'm glad that's still there. And the writing, now I'm aware that this is a play and it's going to be different from the books. It's going to be a different style and it's going to be a different way of the story of Harry Potter coming across. However, as an English student, I've read a lot of plays that were fantastic and brilliantly written and comes across just as well in a script than it does on stage. For example, The History Boys, my favourite play. It's brilliantly written and it's brilliantly done on stage. The writing has to be a baseline. I've read plays that are bad in script and it's difficult to translate that onto a stage, and you can tell when things have been badly written. This for me felt juvenile, especially the conversations between Albus and Scorpius. They felt, I know they were only young in this, they were about 14, so they were in their third, maybe fourth year of Hogwarts. However, they still sounded like children occasionally. Like, I know when I was 14 I didn't speak like Shakespeare, but I had some level of eloquence, and so do other people of that age. Young people aren't stupid, and I don't think they've grasped that at all. Like, with the writing of the Harry Potter books, it grows up with the characters. So in the first book it was aimed at a younger audience, however the writing wasn't juvenile and, ooh, neighbours, the writing wasn't juvenile and you didn't feel patronised at all. In this I felt a little patronised, and it did sort of feel like a kind of reunion episode where all the characters meet back 20 years later and they want to meet and see how they're doing. It doesn't feel like we've caught up with them and they've grown. It just sort of feels like, I remember when you did that thing. I remember when I did that thing. And it was just kind of like more of a reunion rather than a next instalment. Much of the plot and the characters could have been fixed with the writing. The dialogue in the play has to be good. It has to be good dialogue. It has to sound like people would say it. And I was reading this thinking, even no, they wouldn't say that. Like, there's certain things that each of the characters say. I'm fully aware that these are fictional characters, but they're still people and they've got complications and layers to them that you read in the books. And I know they've grown up and I know it's a long time later. However, it's like I'm reading about completely new people. And I think that has to do with the fact that J.K. Rowling did come up with the idea for the story. It says based on a story by J.K. Rowling, John Tiffany and Jack Thorne. And then Jack Thorne was the playwright, and I don't think he translated it very well. Which is one of the things I'm looking forward to with Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, because Jo wrote the screenplay, so I'm hoping they're her characters and I'm hoping they're better than when someone else has taken her characters and they've not translated as well. And it just sort of, it lets me down a little bit. Because I've read plays with fantastic dialogue and I've read plays with poor dialogue, and it doesn't translate well on the stage. It really, really doesn't. Like, for example, I'm throwing back to it, The History Boys. When I read that, it's incredibly witty dialogue, still a bit pretentious at times, but these boys are pretentious, so it makes a lot of sense. But it translates incredibly well on stage, and you don't feel like you've lost anything by not seeing it. You still fall in love with the characters. Whereas I've read plays with really, really bad dialogue, and it improves to a point when you've seen it on stage, but not a lot, because you still grimace when they're saying certain things. You're like, ooh, people wouldn't say that, that's just cringy. And it felt like that sometimes in here. Little bits and pieces were just a bit too cringy and juvenile for me. I felt patronised. I felt a little bit like it was more of a fan pleaser than a next instalment. Like, they were just sort of like, here's what's happening to them, now leave us alone, kind of thing. And it doesn't feel like they've actually tried. I know the talents of Jo. This isn't her. This really, really isn't. Right, now time for some questions. Did you enjoy The Cursed Child? What did you think to the characters, the plot? How do you feel like Harry, Ron and Hermione, how do you feel like they've matured? How do you feel about it? Let me know. I want to talk about this. I'm not done yet. That's it from me this time. If you want to stick around, you know what to click, and I'll see you next time.